Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my Endless Diary Tales channel? Thank you so much. After the college entrance exams were reinstated in the 1970s, my daughter Emily vowed with absolute determination that she would get into the prestigious Tsinghua, or Peking University, to make me proud. But to our dismay, she failed. I wanted to grit my teeth and support her for another year of study, but she refused, saying her father, Mason, worked too hard in the military, and she should start earning money early to support the family. She looked on with envy as the son of Mason's old flame, Clara, received bundles of government gifts and headed off to the glamorous capital to attend Tsinghua University. Meanwhile, Emily carried a few bags and went from town to town doing odd jobs with a group of old women. In the end, she followed Mason's wishes and married the dim-witted son of a man named William from our village. Just like that, her entire life drifted by in obscurity and hardship. As I lay on my deathbed, barely breathing, I was overwhelmed with guilt for not having given Emily a better life. But Mason, instead of showing remorse, straightened his military uniform and sneered. Let me tell you the truth. Back then, I gave the admission letter to Clara's son. How could the daughter of a soldier deserve such a good university? I collapsed emotionally and screamed. So, it was you and Clara who ruined my daughter's future. I beat him with all my strength. But he grabbed a pillow and smothered me to death. When I opened my eyes again, I was back on the very day we were waiting for the acceptance letter from Tsinghua University. I put on the blood-stained military uniform my father had worn on the battlefield, and pinned on his medal. Limping slightly, I made my way toward the military compound. Mom, I'm definitely going to get into Tsinghua, Emily said confidently. Uncle's waiting at home for the postman to deliver the letter personally. Why bother going to the post office yourself? Her words were so innocent, I couldn't bear to tell her the truth. In our past life, after the exams, Emily and I waited anxiously at home for the admission letter that never came. I feared something had gone wrong, but Emily believed with all her heart she would make it. In the end, we only received the devastating news that she had set her application goals too high and wasn't accepted. Mason even called specifically to mock her, saying, "So, what if you always had good grades? You fell apart at the critical moment. You're not cut out for anything serious. Honestly, what's the point of wasting money on education? Wouldn't it be better to marry William's idiot son?" He even said Emily wasn't even worth a strand of hair from Holden, Clara's son. Clara, the widow, had once been Mason's first love. He claimed to be just taking care of the two of them. But in truth, their behavior was scandalous. I didn't want Emily to be mocked by her classmates for having a single mother, so I kept my head down and endured it all. I never expected Mason to do something so cruel. After that mocking phone call, Emily became extremely depressed. I encouraged her to study for another year, but she took Mason's words to heart. She felt sorry for her father working so hard in the military, and for me laboring alone in the countryside. So, she gave up her dream and her life was wasted. Looking at her still youthful and beautiful face, I gently stroked her hair and said, "Let's get the acceptance letter first, then we'll go surprise your dad." "All right." Emily beamed with joy. At the post office, I rushed to the counter. "Excuse me, where's Emily Carter's college admission letter?" The staff member replied impatiently, "Your husband came early this morning and picked it up." My heart sank. My legs gave out and I collapsed to the floor. But Emily, unaware, sighed with relief and said, "Let's go home. Dad must be waiting for us right now." I didn't have time to grieve. I made a split-second decision. I put on my father's battle-worn uniform, pinned on his medal, and limped with Emily onto a train bound for the military compound to find Mason. Emily fell silent as if sensing something and said nothing more. When we arrived with our large bags, the once friendly gatekeeper's demeanor changed the moment I mentioned who we were looking for. "You're here to see Captain Mason Carter?" "Yes, he's my father," Emily answered. The guard's next words felt like a bucket of cold water poured over us. Captain Carter was transferred a long time ago. The way he looked at us was like we were filth. People nearby began whispering and pointing. Must be poor country relatives. Even though I'd braced myself, my world spun out of control. I didn't know how to explain any of this to Emily. With no way to reach Mason, I took her to a small guest house near the base to rest. As I gently held my father's medal in my hand, I drifted off, only to be jolted awake by a bucket of icy water. Wake up! What are you doing here? Instead of working your farm back in the countryside. I snapped awake instantly, eyes wide in shock, and instinctively looked beside me. But Emily was gone. She had been tied to a chair with white rope. A filthy rag was stuffed in Emily's mouth. Mason's mother stood beside her with arms akimbo, radiating fury. Weren't you the one lying in bed pretending to be too weak to move? Who are you cursing now? Take that little bastard and get out of here. Years ago, Mason's mother had fallen seriously ill and never fully recovered. Mason blamed me for not taking good enough care of her. So he took every last cent from our home and brought her to a hospital out of town. Later, when I wanted to visit her, Mason told me she was still weak and recovering in a convalescent home. At that time, with all the money gone, Emily and I couldn't even afford basic survival, let alone a normal life. Every day, I racked my brain trying to figure out which hillside might have enough wild vegetables, so the two of us wouldn't starve. So when I saw Mason's mother, full of strength and ferocity, I was genuinely stunned. She snapped, "Let me tell you something. Mason and Clara are doing just fine. Don't come here messing things up." "What are you saying? Are you telling me my dad's having an affair with Clara?" Emily blurted out in shock. I had long known Mason had another home outside with Clara, but Emily didn't. Her sudden outburst enraged Mason's mother, and she slapped Emily hard across the face. Her cheeks swelled up instantly. I froze for a second, then lunged forward and started struggling with her. But after all these years of surviving on wild vegetables, I was no match for a city woman who lived on meat, eggs, and milk. She pinned me down and beat me mercilessly. "You brought this bastard here to ruin my son's life. Dream on. I'll teach you a lesson on behalf of your father." Her fists rained down on me, and as I grew weaker, she stood up and kicked me hard in the chest. A sharp pain surged through me, and I tasted blood in my mouth. Behind the door, relatives had gathered to watch the spectacle. A chorus of whispers filled the hallway. I heard, "She's Captain Carter's arranged marriage wife. She came here with her daughter to beg for backdoor college admission." Another voice chimed in, "No, I heard she tried to seduce Captain Carter and failed, so now she's pushing her daughter to do it." But one small voice stood out. "Wait a minute. Aren't these actually Captain Carter's real wife and daughter?" "What nonsense!" Mason's mother screamed. "My daughter-in-law is Clara. My grandson is Holden. As for this who got knocked up with some bastard and now wants to blame it on my son. Keep dreaming in broad daylight." I gritted through the pain and said clearly, "I'm Mason Carter's legal wife. They're the ones who stole my daughter's college slot." I raised my father's military medal high and shouted, "My father was a war hero. I demand justice from the leadership." "What are you rambling about?" someone yelled. "It was Holden who got in. What kind of skills could a scrappy girl like your daughter possibly have?" Just then Mason arrived with Clara and Holden in tow. The whole family was dressed to the nines, and a sleek luxury car was parked behind them. Mason's expression turned stiff when he saw my battered state. Clara, noticing the medal in my hand, quickly stepped forward to smooth things over. "No matter what, you've got to accept reality," she said. "What are you doing bringing that broken thing here with that?" She snatched the medal and smashed it to the ground. "No matter what, Mason and I will never allow any backdoor college admissions. Even if you and Mason were married in the past, you never respected that marriage. Always scheming, never decent." Her words drew thunderous applause from the crowd outside. "That's right, spoken like a real teacher," Mason coldly sneered. "Go back to where you came from. A soldier should lead by example." His so-called integrity reminded me of something that happened back when Emily was accepted to a high school near the military base. I had asked Mason if, when he had spare time, he could occasionally take her to the base cafeteria for a proper meal. I even offered to pay. I thought it would be an easy favor, something a father could do. But he refused me flatly, saying he could never use his position for private benefit. Yet every day he personally delivered braised ribs and hand-wrapped dumplings to Holden, who would eat half and toss the rest. Meanwhile, Emily lived on wild vegetable paste, her face growing more sallow and thin by the day. Remembering all this, I couldn't hold back my tears. Emily reached out, heart aching, to pick up the metal. But before she could grab it, Holden stomped down on her hand, grinding it into the ground with his foot. Mason stood there, watching his own biological daughter get humiliated, doing absolutely nothing. With fury burning in her eyes, Emily sank her teeth into Holden's leg. But by the time she managed to retrieve the military medal, it had already shattered into pieces. "What the hell is this? You dare hurt my son?" Mason roared as he slapped Emily hard across the face. Emily stood there stunned, staring blankly at her biological father. She had seen him only a handful of times in her entire life. Even when he called, it was only to criticize her. And now, after standing before him for so long, his eyes still looked at her like she was a stranger. He'd even hit her until she bled for Holden. Emily's eyes were filled with sorrow and betrayal. Maybe it was her look of grief that made Mason pause. He hesitated for a moment, and finally opened his mouth. Emily barely murmured a faint sound. Mason suddenly looked awkward, shifting uncomfortably. Holden noticed the slightest crack in Mason's expression, and immediately began to whine. "Dad, it hurts so bad. Look what she did to me." Clara jumped in, scowling. "These country folks really have no manners. So rough. Just look at how she bit our son." Mason had kicked Emily so hard earlier that her hand was red and swollen. But to Clara, it was nothing more than a passing comment. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to stay conscious. "Give me back my daughter's acceptance letter," I said, enunciating each word with clenched teeth. "Give it back or I'll report your bigamy to your commanding officer." Mason smirked triumphantly. "Did you forget? We never registered our marriage. You just let me sleep with you all those years for free." Hearing those smug words made my world collapse. All hope drained from me. My daughter's future was ruined. His mother, seeing that I still wouldn't give up, looked around the room, picked up a pillow, and walked toward me. My heart leapt to my throat. I suddenly felt the same suffocating panic I'd experienced in my previous life on the verge of death. "I'll shut you up right now," she growled. Mason just stood there, acting as if he couldn't see any of it. Emily rushed forward to stop her, but Holden quickly restrained her. Then, shockingly, his hand started to grope Emily inappropriately. He even tried to pull her pants down. I thought the nightmare from my previous life was about to repeat itself. I closed my eyes in utter despair. Suddenly, the door burst open. A stern-looking elderly man in military uniform stormed in, followed by a group of people. Without hesitation, he slapped Mason hard across the face. Somehow, I felt the heavy weight in my chest suddenly lift. I coughed violently and spat out a mouthful of blood onto the floor. Emily screamed in anguish. "Mom!" Everyone in the room froze, stunned and at a complete loss for what to do. Clara ran to Mason's side, distressed, and immediately frowned. "What is wrong with you? Are you insane?" Mason tried to gesture at Clara, urging her to stay quiet, but she wouldn't stop. She kept rambling, berating the elderly man without even knowing who he was. "I'm so sorry you had to see this mess," Mason said quickly, lowering his head in apology. "This is my former arranged marriage wife from the countryside. She's uneducated and causing a scene. Don't worry, I'll handle this properly and make sure she never stirs up trouble again." Hearing Mason address the man as commander, Clara's expression changed. She awkwardly tried to recover, saying, "Sir or not, you still can't go around hitting people." The elderly man grunted heavily and gave Mason a sharp, disgusted glance. He waved his hand, and several people in white lab coats immediately rushed over to examine me. As they began checking my condition, the old man grasped my hand tightly and said with emotion, "May, you look exactly like your father." I looked up at him and cautiously asked, "Uncle Winston?" "Yes, it's me," he answered, his voice trembling. His eyes were wet with tears. "If only you had come to me sooner." In that moment, I felt like I finally had someone to rely on. My father had been gone for years. During his life, his work had always been mysterious. He'd even spent many of his last years in the hospital. Before he passed, he gave me a sealed address and told me solemnly, "Unless something truly terrible happens, don't ever look for the person at this address." Uncle Winston had been by his side then. That strong, towering man cried like a child as he said, "Don't worry, old friend. I'll treat your daughter like my own." But later, my mother remarried and took me away. At first, I still exchanged letters with Uncle Winston. But when I graduated from high school at 18, my mother accepted a bride price of 200 yuan and forced me to marry Mason. That was when I gradually lost contact with Uncle Winston, and I had followed my father's dying wish not to seek him out. Unless it was a matter of life and death, I had sworn never to contact Uncle Winston. Mason, unsurprisingly cunning enough to climb from a rural background to the rank of company commander, immediately sensed the deep bond between Uncle Winston and me. He rushed to explain, "Sir, this is all a misunderstanding. Emily is technically my daughter." "Yes, but she failed her college entrance exams. I couldn't go against organizational protocol and pull strings for her." Uncle Winston calmly sat down in the chair like he owned the room, gently cradling the broken military medal in his palm, as if it were a priceless relic, softly blowing off the dust. Meanwhile, Emily stood with her hands swollen and red from being stepped on, eyes blazing with fury. "I got into Tingua," she shouted. "You're the one who took my acceptance letter." Her voice cracked as she screamed, rage shaking her frame as she stared at her father, who continued to twist the truth. "Don't believe her?" Mason scoffed. "This spoiled girl's just been coddled too long. Watch me beat that attitude out of her." Mason raised his hand. I tried to push myself up, but the pain overtook me, and I could only let out strained gasps. Uncle Winston rubbed my back gently, then calmly said something that made Mason freeze mid-motion. "I was blood brothers with Emily's grandfather," he said coldly. "Which makes Emily my granddaughter. Lay a hand on her. Go ahead, try it." Uncle Winston had been a titan in the military world for decades. With one glance, he saw straight through the lies and manipulation. "Emily is my granddaughter, which means May is my daughter. What you've done to the two of them reflects on me as a father, and I won't stand for it." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, and her nose turned red as she began to sob. Uncle Winston stood protectively in front of us like a true father. He remembered how back in high school, Emily had been left alone in the rain while no one came to pick her up. Her stomach growled with hunger, but she couldn't buy a meal without food stamps. If she ate that day, she'd go hungry the next. And yet she watched as Mason showed up with freshly cooked ribs and 2 umbrellas for Holden. Emily thought maybe, just maybe, 1 umbrella might be for her. But no, not even that. Mason acted like he couldn't even see her. Holden grinned mockingly, stuck his tongue out, and said, "Thanks, Uncle. When are you and Mom finally getting married?" Mason laughed awkwardly, swallowing hard. "Doesn't matter if we register or not. I'm still your dad." Still clinging to denial, Mason insisted. "I didn't take Emily's letter. She just didn't get in. She cracked under pressure. Unlike Holden, she just doesn't have the right mindset. She's hopeless. A girl like her should just go to some vocational school and get married early." Hearing my obedient, kind daughter described that way made my blood boil. Uncle Winston's eyes sharpened. "Say that again, I dare you." His quiet authority silenced the room. Mason couldn't utter another word, but his mother puffed up and dared to speak. "What? Isn't my son right? Sons are the ones who carry on the family line. You can only count on sons." I'd had enough. "Count on your son. Back when he was sick and soiling himself, who cleaned up after him? That was me." In that moment, I felt incredibly fortunate. I never officially registered our marriage. I didn't have to go through the agony of divorcing Mason. I respected the fact that when I was a clueless 18-year-old girl, he had given me a home and the regrets of our previous life. I would leave them in the past because I knew now there was no happy ending for a man like him. Even though a tightness still lingered in my chest, my daughter's future mattered more than anything. The school year was about to start. Without that acceptance letter, I feared Emily would miss her chance at college. Uncle Winston looked toward us and said firmly, "If my granddaughter's upset, I'm not wasting breath on arguments. I still have some influence. Sweetheart, we'll go to the Education Bureau right now to verify your scores. If everything checks out, you're going to college. We'll have the letter reissued." His words were addressed to both Emily and me. and they let the weight on my heart finally settle. But his eyes remained locked on Mason, making every hair on that man's body stand on end. Uncle Winston didn't bother listening to any more of Mason's excuses. He simply told him to get lost as far away as possible, and then brought me and Emily straight to the hospital. Mason thought that would be the end of it. After all, deep down he still believed Emily desperately wanted a father. But would it really all blow over that easily? For several days, Mason lived in fear, his nerves on edge until the inevitable happened. He was officially demoted. When he got home, he saw Clara sitting in front of the mirror, carefully drawing on her brows and applying makeup. Holden lounged nearby, flipping lazily through a martial arts novel. The sight of them sent Mason into a quiet rage. "When can I go to college, huh?" Holden asked casually. Before he could finish, Mason snapped. He lashed out, yelling, "College! College! College! If you've got what it takes, get in on your own. College my ass!" Holden was furious. He slammed the door and stormed out. Clara looked at Mason, who usually had a mild temper around her and her son, and barely recognized him. She couldn't figure out what had triggered this sudden change. It wasn't until Mason's mother pulled her aside and whispered the truth that Clara realized what had happened. Moments later, Clara walked out, her eyes filled with tears. "It's okay," she said gently. "If he can't go to college, then so be it. Well, just keep Holden here with us, close to our hearts forever." Though past her prime, Clara had taken excellent care of herself. Her soft, delicate hands wrapped around Mason's neck, and her warm breath brushed against his ear, turning it red. Mason's temper vanished in an instant. He let out a long, heavy sigh. "Fine," he said. "I owe the two of you from a past life anyway." Mason couldn't help but compare Clara and me. In his eyes, I was nothing but a country bumpkin who never measured up to his standards. He only married me because my biological mother swore I was hardworking and could endure hardship. If it weren't for that promise, he would have never even considered it. Clara, on the other hand, couldn't lift a thing or do any chores. Back when Mason served in the army alongside his cousin, that cousin had bravely fought on the battlefield and died young. Mason had introduced Clara to his cousin, hoping she'd have a good life. But with his cousin gone, she and Holden were left behind. Who else would take care of them if not Mason? Ironically, it was thanks to that cousin's sacrifice that Mason rose quickly through the ranks. His leaders admired him for having a heroic relative, but for all his clever calculations, he never expected I would know his former commanding officer. Gritting his teeth, Mason quickly came up with a new plan. He reassured Clara, promising that Holden would still get into college one way or another. Clara smiled gently, but in her heart, she was repulsed. She had worked hard to stay youthful and radiant, dressed in glamorous clothes. Mason, once handsome and energetic, had gone soft from years in an office. His hair was thinning, and he was nearly bald. He was no longer worthy of her. If Holden's real father hadn't died, she never would have stooped to marry someone like Mason from the countryside. But whatever, she could tolerate it for her son's future. If it weren't for Holden's prospects, she would never have let a pig like Mason roll around on top of her. After soothing Mason, Clara made up an excuse and headed to the dance hall. Mason waved his hand in approval. Outside the hall, a man was already waiting for her. Clara beamed and let him wrap an arm around her waist as they disappeared into the nearby guest house. Meanwhile, Uncle Winston had already verified Emily's exam results. Everything was in order. To be safe, he even moved her directly into her college dorm. When he saw her chosen major, advanced physics, his old eyes filled with tears. "You've got a bright future ahead of you," he whispered over and over. "Just like your grandfather. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant." When he looked at Emily, it was like he was seeing a long-lost loved one. Her major was advanced physics. I couldn't help but wonder, could someone like Holden even handle college-level learning? I remembered before my death in the last life, stumbling across Mason's private drawer where he'd secretly kept Emily's acceptance letter. Maybe in some twisted way, he held on to it as a token of the only flicker of fatherly love he ever felt for her. At last, my heart felt at peace. I planned to go back to the village to sell our old house and farmland, then move to the city, so I could be close to Emily while she studied. Uncle Winston handed me an envelope and said I wouldn't have to worry about Emily's tuition or living expenses. I refused again and again. Finally, after much protest, he stomped his foot and confessed. This is the last bit of money your father left you. He told me if May ever shows up asking for help, it means she's reached the end of her rope. You must help her. This is my final wish. It's his military compensation. He didn't trust your mother to handle it. She always favored sons over daughters. Holding that envelope in my hand, I broke down in sobs. I never imagined that even in death, my father would find a way to protect me one last time. If not for the promise I made to him, if not for his dying instructions, I never would have gone to Uncle Winston. I would have destroyed everything and gone to war with Mason instead. But I still had to return to the village to take care of a few things. What I didn't expect was to run into someone completely out of place. Mason. He had come back too. He didn't even bother pretending anymore. The moment he saw me, it was like running into a sworn enemy. Was all of this your doing? He snapped. What did I even do? I asked. Mason let out a cold laugh. You told Winston to have me demoted, didn't you? Because of you, Clara and I aren't even allowed to live in the family housing unit anymore. He didn't bother hiding anything now. He called Clara by her first name openly and intimately. I almost laughed out loud. What a joke. What does any of this have to do with me? You brought this on yourself, I replied. Back when you left my daughter and me to rot in the countryside, did you ever think about what kind of ending you'd meet? Let me remind you, Emily is your biological daughter, and you shattered her heart. At the mention of Emily's name, Mason's expression changed slightly, as if a faint trace of human decency still remained in him. Let's not drag this too far, he muttered. I know I was wrong over the years. He actually admitted it. But then he added, I came here just to warn you. Whatever tricks you've got, throw them at me. Just don't involve Clara. So that was it. Clara had come home last night with puffy red eyes, and Mason thought I was the one who had done something to her. The truth was, over all these years, Clara and I had barely exchanged more than a few words. His accusation sparked something in me. All these years of pent-up rage came roaring to the surface. As a father, he had shirked every single responsibility, and now he had the nerve to defend a woman like Clara. I gave up on being composed. Courtesy, after all, is something you extend to people who deserve it. And Mason didn't qualify as human. I picked up a broom from the corner and started swinging it at him. Get out of my sight. The farther, the better. I even clawed at him a few times. It wasn't much, but it helped vent a little of the fury in my chest. Mason fled, swearing under his breath about how uncivilized I was. But the villagers had already gathered. Isn't that Mason? Someone mocked. I heard your son got into college, huh? Another jeered. That's his daughter, idiot. Not his son. The man doesn't even know who his real kid is. Their sarcasm clearly got to him. Weren't you supposed to be some big-shot official in the city? One person scoffed. If your cousin hadn't died, you think you'd be where you are? Shameless bastard, someone muttered. Mason stumbled home, humiliated. He didn't even stop for a drink of water before Clara came bouncing in from the dance hall. She was excited, her cheeks glowing. Mason, I've got a business deal for us. Quit your job. This project is a sure win. The guy's a big-time investor from Hong Kong and Taiwan. Once we make it big, we'll send Holden abroad for college. Then he'll get married early and give us a grandchild. Wouldn't it be nice to retire early and raise the baby together? Mason thought it over and actually found it convincing. After all, wasn't the whole point of life to have your children close to carry on your legacy? And besides, the country was undergoing reforms. Rich investors and businessmen were flooding into the cities, basking in praise and admiration. He figured, why not? He'd clawed his way from the countryside to this point. Surely he could go further. Blinded by trust in Clara, Mason didn't even investigate the project. He handed over all their money to her. Back in the village, the simple and kind-hearted folks were appalled when they heard what Mason had done. They offered me comfort and support. At the village chief's suggestion, I decided not to sell our old house. No matter where you go, he said, home should never be lost. Emily was now officially our village's first ever college student. The villagers gave what little they could. Small donations, heartfelt gifts. The money wasn't much, but it filled my heart with warmth. I bowed deeply to everyone before setting off back to the city. Meanwhile, Clara and Holden were too busy with their so-called business to even dance anymore. Mason, thinking his new life would be full of domestic bliss, imagined coming home each day to loving embraces. But what he came home to instead was an empty house. He thought resigning from his position would be complicated, but surprisingly they processed his resignation without a word. By that afternoon it was official. Mason was ordered to pack his things and leave. He stormed out, cursing the sick offense who had turned their backs on him. "Just wait until I make it big," he grumbled. "Don't come begging me for help then." Now he was the only idle person in the house. All of their savings had been handed over to Clara for her business venture. When Mason asked what the business actually was, Clara gave vague, evasive answers that he couldn't make sense of. "You just can't sit still, can you?" she said with a smile. "Enjoy life for a few days. Once the business is up and running, you'll have to take on the heavy lifting." Flattered, Mason once again let himself be sweet-talked. He handed over his private savings, every last set from various side incomes, directly to Clara. But it wasn't long before Clara came to him again, frowning. "We're short on cash," she sighed. "Just one last round of investment to go. The government's encouraging entrepreneurship. We can't let this opportunity slip away." She stomped her foot in frustration, repeating, "What a shame," over and over without ever asking him to solve the problem directly, just to make him feel the pressure. Mason furrowed his brow and came up with a new idea. He came to me. He looked down at me like I owed him something and said, "That fool William from the next village is offering 30,000 yen to marry Emily. He says he wants to improve his family line. And let's face it, Emily's a good breeder." I stared at him, eyes wide with disbelief. "Say that again." "I dare you." "You didn't understand me," Mason repeated calmly. "I said we should marry Emily off early. Take the bride price and use it to fund our business. And don't say I never did anything for you. If Claire and I are eating meat, I'll make sure you get to drink the soup." He was so deep in his fantasy of becoming a rich businessman that he couldn't see the fire building inside me. I shoved him out the door and lunged at him, punching him as hard as I could. I grabbed the vase next to me and smashed it over his head like a crazed lioness. "Get out," I said. "Get out," I screamed. Blood streamed down his head, and though he dared not fight back, he kept muttering, "So uncivilized. So uncivilized." Even as his blood spilled, Mason still clung to the dream of becoming a tycoon. But the dream ended abruptly. Clara and Holden vanished without a trace. One morning, while Mason was still sound asleep, Clara took every last cent, grabbed Holden and her mother, and ran off to be with that big-shot investor from Hong Kong and Taiwan. Mason was left with nothing. I always believed karma would catch up to him. I just didn't expect it to happen so quickly. When Uncle Winston told me the whole story, it was like listening to a joke. "They got divorced?" I asked. "Mason's a total fool," Uncle Winston said. "Clara said she needed the divorce certificate to get some paperwork done. He believed every word. Now Mason had nothing. The party tolerated his presence for now because he'd at least done some work in the past, so they hadn't kicked him out of the housing yet. While Uncle Winston and I basked in the warmth of the sun, Mason was having a full-blown breakdown. He had found Clara's goodbye letter, and it was vicious. There wasn't a shred of affection in it. She cursed him from start to finish. "Love? What love? I never loved you. You're the biggest idiot in the world. Holden was never your son. You only ever had one child, and you broke her heart." After reading that, Mason's anger shot through the roof. He collapsed on the spot from a stroke. When he woke up, the side of his face had sagged. His mouth drooped. He drooled constantly. He couldn't move. The man who once thought he had it all fell from glory overnight. He asked to see Emily, but she refused. She didn't even acknowledge him. Then he tried to manipulate me into taking care of him. I repeated his own words back to him, word for word. "You and I were never officially married. Why would I be responsible for you?" He gurgled incoherently, unable to form proper words. You're heartless, not letting your daughter take care of me. Tell me this, I snapped. From the day she was born, did you ever change her diaper once? Did you ever feed her a single meal? Why do men think the whole world owes them something? This was karma, pure and simple. Mason had completely broken Emily's heart. He had always cared deeply about appearances. But now he had no dignity left, not even control over his bowels. He was eventually discharged from the hospital after just barely recovering. And even then, no one would take him. He had no money and no place in a nursing home. He was no longer the commanding officer who once held sway at the base. Now he was just a sick, abandoned old man. One so helpless that not a single soul cared whether he lived or died. Only now did Mason realize just how terribly wrong he had been. But time doesn't rewind, and broken hearts don't develop cracks. They shatter completely. A shattered mirror doesn't go back together. His mother took him back to the countryside in disgrace. The two of them lived off whatever wild herbs they could dig up in the hills. They soon grew skin and bones from hunger. And with their pride stripped bare, they didn't dare look for Emily again. That was their ending, surviving barely in pitiful misery. And while they withered away, my daughter shone brighter and brighter. If Mason was the cruel, abusive killer in this story, then Clara and Holden were his accomplices. 2 months later, I saw Clara and her son once more, this time behind bars. That so-called Hong Kong Taiwanese investor was just a scam artist. He cleaned them out entirely. Holden, impulsive and arrogant, committed an irreversible crime with Clara's help. They killed someone. But none of that had anything to do with me anymore. With Uncle Winston's support, I opened a small diner using the cooking skills I'd honed for years. Good food at fair prices. It didn't take long before the place was packed every day. Emily, now thriving, consistently ranked among the top students. She was no longer the timid girl she used to be. She made new friends, 2 genuine ones. I told her, not all men in the world are like your father. There are good men like your grandfather, my dad. So keep studying hard, and while you do, enjoy your youth. And if love comes your way, don't be afraid to embrace it. Emily blushed and said nothing, casting a shy glance at Uncle Winston's son. Then, with quiet confidence, she said, I'll wait until I've built the strength to handle whatever life throws at me. When that time comes, I'll welcome a new beginning. The sun was shining gently. A soft breeze drifted through the air.